Hello, it's Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet, welcoming you to another episode of VETchat, UK's #1 veterinary podcast and one of the top veterinary podcasts in the world. And we are very fortunate to have the world famous James Russell with us today. James is a very good friend of mine, ex-BVA president, now is the president of Vetlife, which is our veterinary benevolent charity, if you like, looking after people who are struggling within the profession. And of course, we have the Vetlife telephone line that I know we're going to be talking about as well. So a very, very important charity that's doing amazing work within the profession. And, you know, James, joking aside, thank you for the great work that you're doing there and, you know, the work that you do across the profession with BVA and so on.
Thank you, Anthony, for that lovely introduction. I'm not sure about world famous. I think I might be the most famous James in my house, but I think that's about it.
Well, you know, we're going to be talking a little bit about Vetlife and obviously mental health and everything. But I think before we start, it's always important to have moments of joy in life. And I'm a big believer in, you know, expressing gratitude. And, you know, so it was heartfelt, you know, what you've done for the profession. I do, and I know that joy can work in one way for one person and can work against another person with the same event. And I'm thinking about Sunday afternoon. This side of the East Lancashire Road, at least half of the population was very happy. And then on the other side of the East Lancashire Road, I think there were lots of people who were leaving their place of entertainment a lot earlier than they would usually do because we'd given them a bit of a spanking, hadn't we?
Well, I mean, you'll have seen on Facebook, Anthony, those horrific scenes of stewards holding the fans down until the final whistle. Which, yeah, it was a great Sunday for us, wasn't it?
It was really good. Do you know, I have a memory of my dad was a season ticket holder, and you can look at all the politics of football and, you know, they're enlarging the Champions League again, and it's a lot about money and so on. And I struggled with that a bit, you know, in my 20s and 30s because it just looked a bit unethical even then. But my dad was a season ticket holder. When he sort of got ill and passed away, I took over his season tickets. And I remember being at a game on a cold, and I struggle with the cold on my hands in January. It was a Monday night game, Liverpool playing Norwich. Suarez got a hat-trick, as he usually did against Norwich, and every one of those goals was a potential goal of the season. And I remember standing up and just thinking, this brings joy. You know, for the last sort of 10 years or so, I think we've been playing, although we haven't won, you know, many championships and things, we've played joyful football. And I think before we kind of move into, you know, the whole chat, it's so important for people to have gratitude, but to find joy in life, because there's no matter, you look at the Paralympics at the moment with people struggling with sometimes really, you know, severe disabilities, but they're still amazing archers or they can swim amazingly. And, you know, it shows the power of the human spirit, doesn't it? Something like the Paralympics.
Oh, without a doubt. And it's fantastic the way I think that that sport and the Olympics seem to be able to do this particularly, can really kind of galvanise a nation in a way which is so much more positive than than some of the other bits of news that we've picked up around the country over this summer of disquiet amongst the country. But when you see how united everybody can become around sports, I do find it absolutely fascinating what it does and the part that it plays in all of our, well, in many of our lives. Absolutely. And while we're talking about joy in football, Anthony, I've got to get a plug in as well for Liverpool's other Premier League team, Liverpool Women, because that if you want something which hasn't yet been spoilt by the money, come and join me. Come and watch the women one weekend, because it's a very different experience, very much more like watching your friends and neighbours playing football and having a chat with them afterwards. So come and join us.
Well, this is the beauty, I think, of, you know, if you take it too seriously, you see the hooliganism element. My wife is a teacher. The kids take it so seriously because they see the players on the television, and then there's arguments in the playground and fisticuffs and things. So it is nice when you can see that sport is about the taking part. It's about the enjoyment. of course, there's a competition element, and I think that's, right and proper. But you don't want it to become so big that people go home and they get depressed. And, unfortunately, we do hear cases of people going home and then, they hit their partner because their team has lost. So there's a dark side as well. But I just felt that it was good to start off with having a go at the Man United, because it's always good. As long as it's done with good fun rather than anything else, then and anybody listening who's a Man United supporter, I accept my apologies if you've taken it the wrong way. It's just a little bit of fun. Because, of course, sometimes, we also know that, people do go through hard times. And I know there was recently an article came up, from the Office of National Statistics globally, across the UK, so not attached to any particular profession or anything, but suicide rates going up.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing it in, Anthony. And I think it's important, isn't it, that we do mention this. But as you've alluded to, really, in your introduction there, that we do so in a way which recognises that whilst every loss is a deep and profound loss and immeasurably sad, that we do steer ourselves away from any feelings of sort of suicide being an inevitable consequence of poor mental health or depression or anxiety or any other particular diagnosis, and separate those two things out. We know that statistically 1 in 4 of us will suffer with poor mental health at some point, and very often that will be to a level that it might have quite a profound impact on our life at the time that we're going through it. But for the huge majority of those people, they will come through that period of time, and as you said, will find joy in future life as well. And I think if there's anybody listening to this today who is feeling depressed or anxious or otherwise suffering with poor mental health, that would be my big message to them. Would be that we are here to support you, to hold on to that hope with you, and to carry that hope with you, that there are better days ahead. But you've asked me about the suicide statistics, and I'm certainly not going to shy away from it, because it is a challenge. And we've known for a long time that that suicide is the leading cause of death in males under 40. And actually, what these statistics bring out a little bit more are perhaps some of the greater nuances within that. So on the male side, men between sort of 45 and 50 are the most highly represented group in that suicide statistic. In women, it's a slightly older group, sort of 50 to 55. And I think that one of the things that has been talked about as a result of that has been the impact of menopause on mental health. And something that doctors have been reporting for a while now is that anxiety is perhaps the primary symptom displayed by people who are struggling through the menopause. And I think that's perhaps something for us to reflect on as well, because as very often with diagnoses of conditions in women, a lot has been missed, and a lot of people who perhaps are in need of some hormone replacement therapy or some other sort of support through their menopause are being diagnosed as being anxious, and then diagnosed with anxiety and being put on medication for that, and missing really that sort of root cause. So I think it gives us an awful lot to work from, an awful lot to work on. And I know when we talk about menopause awareness, I think Anna Judson, firstly at SPIBS, but then at BVA, and working with yourself, Anthony, has done an awful lot of work in raising awareness around that. And I think that's a fantastic thing to do, and I really support that. But I think the other thing that I would want to sort of reflect on really is it's easy to fall into the trap, I think, of seeing the numbers of people who are dying by suicide and feeling that there's nothing that could be done. There's nothing that could be done for those people. And we hear it from people who are bereaved by suicide, that if only I had known, if only I'd been able to do something, and quite a lot of sort of guilt attached to that from those bereaved. But the really good news is there's really well evidenced things which you can do, tangible things that you can do within your workplaces, within your home environments, that actually help to improve the safety of those places in terms of suicide risk. And I'm very happy to discuss those a little bit, Anthony, if you'd like me to.
Yeah, just going back a bit because I didn't want to break your flow. Just for interest, Catherine Bell, who's our CEO at Webinar Vet, has also done some podcasts with people talking about the menopause who are experts in that area. And I suppose some people will say, why are two, I'm going to say middle-aged, I'm going to be kind to me by saying middle-aged, but I still feel middle-aged. I still feel about 25, actually, but I don't think anybody else believes me. So I'm going to admit to being, possibly in that, if there's a male menopause or whatever, there is talk about it. But of course, men live with women. And so it's really important that men have an understanding of this, because if they understand that, they can be more empathetic and more compassionate towards partners, friends, colleagues who are perhaps struggling with that, can't they?
Well, absolutely. And I think, being an ally is a really powerful thing to do, isn't it? Whether we're talking about protective characteristics, or we're talking about in this case, perfectly normal and natural life stage progression. There's a poster up in one of the toilets at the university where I work, talking about period poverty, and it makes the point that nearly a quarter of young women are embarrassed by their periods and by the whole sort of process of menstruation. And I think it's important, isn't it, that all of us in society help to sort of quash that embarrassment, because I would conjecture, I don't know, but I would conjecture that that's perhaps a feeling that then leads to some of these difficulties with diagnosis and difficulties with sort of facing into what's going on when we get to the menopause stage of that.
But interesting, obviously, the next point that you led on to, which is, how do we make places more safe and people feeling more, because it's all about inclusivity, isn't it? Often when you hear about people who've been struggling, or you hear about people who unfortunately, passed away because of suicide, it's that isolation, isn't it? They haven't been able to share with people their problems. Nearest and dearest are obviously often, surprised when it happens, or, are caught off guard. And I remember, obviously Vet Voices set up by Sarah and Danny. And one of their big things was very much just be kind. If we are kind within the workforce, do unto others as we would want have done to ourselves, that is probably a big part of it. I still remember sitting next to a young vet at BVA dinner, being told about the experiences of bullying that she'd undergone, in practice. And these things just should not happen. And, we must call those things out, I think.
And it's really hard to hear those stories, isn't it, about members of our own profession? Yeah. And, I work in, I've just said 3 days a week, I'm at university now, sort of working with people who are coming out into our profession. And, I do hear those stories, do hear those tales of damaging experiences in the workplace.
Yeah.
And more I'm hearing really positive stories as well. And I think, if I was looking for a job in practice at the moment, I'd be looking really hard at what have people done around good veterinary workplaces? Are they working towards their great workplace accreditation? Have they bought into the sort of human aspects, as small as they are at the moment, of the RCVS practice standards? What is the culture in the place? Have we got somewhere where I'm going to be psychologically safe as well as physically safe, where I can be myself without fear of ridicule or bullying or whatever? And can I speak out? Can I speak out and ask for help? Can I speak out and tell people that I'm having a bad day? Can I speak out and support others? And that be part of what's accepted and expected as part of the norms of working in that environment. And that's what I mean. These are things which, good workplaces are already doing to a large extent, and we can build on and really use those as an opportunity to sort of maximise the opportunities for us to support people and catch people, and turn them back round into what we've already said is the majority of people who are going to have poor mental health, that they come back out the other side of it feeling supported and loved.
Yeah, because I mean, it is a great profession, and yet we do have people who fall out of love with it, leave, obviously for various reasons. I don't think we're going to probably have time to go over that now, but, you're president of Vetlife. You've obviously been a volunteer of Vetlife for a number of years before that. I know you have manned the phones and things. What is your sort of top 3 or 4 tips that you could give to people who are in practice, to help support maybe that person who is a bit quieter? Of course, from confidentiality perspective, VetLife telephone service, as far as I'm aware, is a confidential one. So that's between you and the person who rings up. So you can't say, well, I'm going to ring up your practice or whatever. How can people become a bit more aware of signs, or, what are the key problems that people are seeing, and how can we kind of, try and make our practices and our veterinary workplaces, big companies, etc., more secure in the way that you suggested?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a huge amount of literature on this, and if people are interested in looking more into it than we can delve into in this fairly short webinar, Anthony, then I would encourage them to look up on the VetLife website the work that Rosie Allister has done on this, and think about how that would apply to their workplace. But if I could give a couple of sort of take-home tips today, I've already alluded to that. We welcome everybody. We welcome everybody. And that is not the same as excusing, poor behaviours or damaging behaviours. It's absolutely right that those are nipped in the bud and are called out at the time that we see them, and that we help to bring those people who are exhibiting those behaviours back into line.
But often, if they are showing some of those behaviours, you look and you say, well, if you've just shouted at me, I've not done anything wrong. There's something else going on in your life. You're a troubled individual. These can be the people who actually, have had problems themselves. You don't know what somebody's back history is. You don't know what's happened, to them this morning. Maybe, a family friend has died or something. So they can be, part of the problem, but they can also be having problems themselves, can't they?
Quite right, and absolutely. So, we talk about calling in rather than calling out with some of those behaviours, and I think that's quite a nice distinction. That we're not going to sort of retaliate with fire in that environment. We are going to do exactly as you just suggested, and take that person under our wing a little bit and say, what's going on here? Why has this behaviour come out today? Why are we seeing that? But then I think beyond that, we can start to look, and I've written about this as well, a blog called The Power of OK. And, that interaction that we have very often when we meet somebody for the first time in a day, morning, how you doing? Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, you? Yeah, good. Nothing has come out of that, has it? We've said hello. But actually...
British. Yeah. British tip up a lip.
If we were to delve a little bit deeper into that,
yes,
then actually we get ahead, don't we? Of,
yes.
I now understand why you lost your rag and shouted at me at 11 o'clock in the morning, because at 9 o'clock in the morning you just told me that your dog's in ICU and your mum's ill or whatever. And so by understanding each other a lot better, we can sort of preempt and snuff out, I think, a lot of those points of conflict, a lot of those points of upset. So, including people, listening to people, making sure that when things are going wrong for them, that we actually respond to that and that we do support them in it. Those would be the very kind of basic tenets of what it is that we would want to talk about. But I said we find much more if we look online. But I think the other thing, if I may just point to, as part of this, we recognise that within our community, just as within society more broadly, we have a whole range of neurodiversities as well.
Yeah.
And one of the pieces of work that I'm so pleased with from this year, and I can say that without any fear of gloating, because I had nothing to do with delivering it, has been the neurodiversity resource that Vetlife has produced. And again, that's something that's free to download from our website and gives some absolutely lovely examples of how workplaces have supported different people with different neurodiversities and enabled them to really get the best out of themselves as employees, but also give the best of themselves to their business as well. So I encourage people to have a look at that and to think about it, because one of the things that we recognise is that there are exceptions to what I'm about to say, but a workplace which is autism friendly or a workplace which is dyslexia friendly is not unfriendly to people who are not dyslexic or not
Yeah,
autistic. So if we get this right, then everybody benefits. And I
yeah,
think that's something that I would be thinking of as well, is that nothing that I'm talking about here makes anybody else more at risk. This isn't about pushing one group aside to envelop another group. It's
yeah.
about broadening our base of inclusion, and I think that's perhaps something that we could really do well.
I know, obviously, it depends when people are listening to this podcast, but we were very fortunate to have Theo Smith, who was on our podcast a few weeks ago, and you can obviously find in the library. And, he is obviously neurodiverse and speaking a lot about that. And also will be at London Vet Show 2024, I think sponsored by Vetlife, if I'm not mistaken. So worth having a look for that podcast as well, if you want to look at neurodiversity in a bit more detail. And obviously, if you're going to London Vet Show in 2024, if you're listening to this in 2026, you've missed it. But the podcast will still be there, so you can still listen to the podcast. I think that's really an important point, that inclusivity, because you're inclusive to somebody with autism, doesn't mean that you're excluding somebody. It's just making that inclusivity even wider, isn't it? Which is a great thing. If I had one tip, one of the things that we do at Webinar Vet is, obviously we're hybrid, so we're not in every day, but on a Tuesday we have fika, where we have half an hour tea break where we don't talk about work. And, finding a bit more out about a person. You can work with somebody, and I've heard it numerous occasions where people say, I'm too busy to actually, as the Americans, I learned a new phrase, have a bio break. I think in Liverpool we say have a slash. If you don't have time in your working day to do that, then there's something seriously wrong. So I remember PDSA were very good locking the door for 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the afternoon, people having lunch breaks. This is normal stuff. If we miss an occasional lunch break because a cesarean comes in or a dog is bleeding to death, of course that takes priority. But if you're missing a lunch break every day, and actually it's unusual to get a lunch break, you can't run on an empty tank, can you?
Absolutely. And a lot of those kind of well-being aspects are really important for us to consider, sort of separately and together, aren't they, with what we've talked about already. As we're building in that, aren't we? We're building some really good sort of hygiene factors, we might consider them, to people's enjoyment of being at work and their ability to sustain themselves and avoid any of those kind of burnout type issues. And an analogy that I've used quite a lot, Anthony, and I'm going to bring it out again, and it's without apology, really, that I've sort of stolen this idea from Rosie and developed it a little bit. Back in the day when we used to go down mines with a canary in a cage, and if the canary fell off its perch, you didn't have the foreman sitting there saying, that canary's a bloody snowflake, if only it learned to breathe a bit better, we'd all be okay. The foreman recognised that canary was there to signify that actually the environment of the team needed to change. And I think that's how I would consider resilience. Resilience is something which I think very often gets attributed to individuals. I don't think it can be. Not in a sustainable way, not in a positive way. But resilience as a team, which is what you're describing, building with your tea breaks, with shutting the doors and letting everybody go to the loo and have their lunch and all the rest of it, as well as all those things that we've talked about of being inclusive, being supportive, being welcoming of diversity. All those things, I think, build resilience in a team, so that when you do have the cesarean that crashes over somebody's lunch break or into the evening or whatever it is, actually the team's able to cope with that in a
Yeah.
much more positive and a much stronger way, because they've all got each other's back. They all know that it is the exception, not the rule. And I think that's something that we can really consider, isn't it? Is how do we make sure that we're responding really well to that canary, but we're responding really well to that canary in a way which which supports development and supports our
Yeah.
team.
Of course, I know you're a volunteer for Vetlife, and Vetlife runs because of the goodwill of volunteers. But, as well as having the telephone line, also supporting vets and nurses and people in the profession, spouses, partners, etc., children who are having hard times. All of these things cost money. And, money does make the world go round, doesn't it? And I know recently Nikki Paul, who's also a good friend, collared me, I think, at Spibs, and I became a life friend of Vetlife. But of course, I know that perhaps there aren't enough of us as vets who support Vetlife on a monthly or an annual basis or a life basis. It's an expensive charity business to run, isn't it? I mean, how does Vetlife kind of manage to make ends meet, and could it benefit from having more money? Is the need getting less, or is it getting bigger?
Yeah, really good questions, Anthony. And look, over the last 5 years, our turnover has increased from £500,000 a year to £1,000,000 a year. And, a phrase I'm very fond of using is that's a lot of marathons. £1,000,000 a
Yes.
year is a lot of marathons. We're really fortunate in that right back in the annals of time when the Victorian Veterinary Benevolent Fund was first brought together, people started to bequeath us donations either as part of their will or as during their life, and that pot remains. And it would be very easy for me to spend that pot tomorrow, but I recognise that my role as a custodian of the charity at the moment, as a trustee, is to make sure that we're a viable charity in the future as well.
Yeah.
But the reason I mention it is I think it really helps us to be able to say that the money which comes from those investments almost, not quite, but almost covers our administrative costs as a charity. So, what that means for anybody who's running a cake sale or running a marathon or riding their bike to John O'Groats or whatever it might be, every penny that they raise goes to our beneficiaries. But we're seeing the charity at its busiest time in its history. So in 2023, we responded to 11 contacts a day on the helpline. To make sure that that's sustainable for our volunteers, we have to have enough volunteers to be able to be on rota to make sure that they don't individually feel like they're carrying too much of the weight of that 11 calls a day. So that requires a lot of training. And our volunteers are hugely well trained, not just trained as a one off, but trained on an ongoing basis. So actually, in terms of all of those sort of aspects of it, it costs our charity roughly £25 every time we answer the phone to somebody. I follow that immediately with, I am not saying that because I wish less people phoned. Not at all. Not at all. I don't want people to feel that a £25 cost to them calling is a barrier to phoning Vetlife. I mention it purely to say, if you were thinking of doing something for us, you know that for every £25 you raise, you make sure that we can be there for another phone call. And we can kind of scale it up from there, but our financial support service as well has supported more people in 2023 than it did in the sort of 3 years previous to that combined. And our more typical recipient now of financial support is somebody who's perhaps trying to get back to work and is stuck in that cycle of not being able to do the CPD to be able to get their RCVS accreditation to get back to work, and can't therefore get back to work and therefore can't afford to do the CPD and the accreditation. So trying to help people to help themselves and to support themselves is a big part of what Vetlife financial support has been doing. It's a big cost. And if you gave me another £1,000,000, I would find some really positive ways of spending it to support our professions. So you alluded, and thank you very much for being a life friend of Vetlife, but we would love for people to consider us in the same way as they consider Water Aid or Cancer Research as a charity that they just give a few pounds to every month, because that helps us to predict our income and helps us to
Yeah.
continue doing the really good work that our trustees and our volunteers and our team at Mansfield Street are doing.
And I remember when Lydia Brown was predecessor president to you, Lydia and I, good mates, helped to get me into vet school. She's the one to blame, James, if you want to write to anybody. And, as Webinar Vet, for people like that who are trying to get back into the profession, feel a bit out of date, but, want to try and get back in maybe 1 or 2 days a week, we do offer free memberships, through Vetlife, obviously. So I think all of those things sort of, just help, don't they, to support.
Thank you.
But I think that monthly or annual giving is something that's really worth considering for people who perhaps at the moment, don't need to use the service, but you never know when there, but for the grace of God go I, you might be needing that service in 5, 10, 15 years' time.
Maybe.
Yeah. James, it's, I've always been a big fan of Vetlife. Thank you for all the great work that you are doing.
I just wondered, Anthony, you mentioned earlier about the charity and its confidentiality.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to reinforce that, if I may, to anyone who's listening and thinking, I'd like to get in touch with Vetlife, but I'm scared that, it might blow back on me in my place of work or with my family, or maybe something I'm engaged in that if the Royal College found out about it, it would be problematic for me. And just to reassure, really, that we are confidential with these 2 exceptions. And the 2 exceptions are if there is a safeguarding concern, so either a child or an at-risk adult at immediate risk of harm, then we would breach confidentiality to support that safeguarding concern. Or if you ring up and threaten terrorism. Okay, that's it. That's where our confidentiality barrier is. Below that, of course, we've got, I mentioned things like RCVS, potential sort of professional conduct issues. All of our volunteers have got acknowledgement from the Royal College that when they're acting as Vetlife volunteers, either on phone or on email, that they do not have the obligations that we normally have of members of the Royal College to report on concerns. So I think you mentioned it earlier, and I just didn't want us to finish without me reinforcing really that important point that we're there to support you, whatever's going on, whatever your concerns are, and it will only be if we have a safeguarding concern or a terrorism concern that we have to report out of that.
And it's a really good point. I was doing a podcast recently with, a company that does dangerous drug monitoring and, through the practice and so on. And obviously, vets, nurses can get caught up in some of the drugs that we do use in veterinary practice. It's important that people can seek professional help for those sort of problems and addictions, isn't it?
Absolutely. And just a final plug, I'm sorry, because your listeners will be bored of hearing me by now and want to go. But if they are working in a workplace which has a dangerous drugs cupboard and it doesn't yet have one of our stickers on, then please, they're free from the office. Just get in touch with us and we'll send them out to you. And they've been around for about 15 years now, those stickers that we put on the dangerous drugs cupboard, and they've had a couple of iterations. But in very much the same way as the Samaritan sticker is at the end of the railway platform. These stickers have been really specifically designed to sort of break through to people who might be at a point of crisis and might be considering using some of those dangerous drugs themselves. And so please, if you're in a space which doesn't have those, get them from us, because that's another aspect of that workplace safety.
You are allowed to make plugs like that, James, and you are never boring. So it's been absolutely fantastic chatting to you. Really important area. I'm glad we've been able to talk about it as frankly as we have been able to. And of course, anybody listening to the podcast who does feel that they want to make that call, obviously the number, do you want to just give us a quick shout of the number? And then, of course, we can put it in the description below as well.
Yeah, please. And what I would say to anyone listening, when I give you this number, stick it in your phone, because even if you never need it, one day you'll be with a mate who does, and you'll be the one who can pass it on, and you'll be a hero. So 03 03 04 02 551, or you can email us confidentially, an amazing level of complexity to the confidentiality of emailing us, but email us through the website vetlife.org.uk.
James, thank you once again. Looking forward to catching up with you, not before London Vet Show, and meeting up with Theo as well. So I'm sure that's going to be a fantastic session at London Vet Show.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks, James. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Do remember the phone number and the email will be below in the description. It's always good to talk. A problem shared is a problem halved. So do reach out to Vetlife if you need to. And hopefully we'll see you on a podcast or a webinar very soon. And enjoy the rest of the day. Take care. Bye-bye.